Okay, guys, welcome back to Declare Independence. Today we're going to talk about how the 2020 election is very different from the 2000 election and some of the similarities and some of the differences, actually, the many differences. First off, you've heard a lot. Man, it's almost like been beaten into it that it took 37 days before Al Gore conceded the election, and why, Trump is in every right to contest and to file whatever, this, that, and the other, and send things to court because Al Gore didn't concede the election for 37 days. Okay, so basically here is some of the facts about the 2000 election, how it's not at all the same as this election. And secondly, what makes, how does this fit in with Ezra's Eagle? We talked a little bit about Ezra's Eagle, how there are I said it was 13, it's actually 14 presidents, starting with Herbert Hoover up to Barack Obama, who were being led by these eagle heads. And then starting with Donald Trump, there are 4 consecutive presidents who are not being led by the eagle heads, who are reigning for themselves. And so you think back, well, wait, wasn't George Bush on the good side, and didn't justice and righteousness prevail, and wouldn't it have been better than having Al Gore as president? I think first off, let's go into their background a little bit. Okay, so George W. Bush, obviously the son of a former president, right? And Al Gore was just the vice president to Bill Clinton for 8 consecutive years. So if you start off from 1988 until 2008, is basically just really 3 people that had control on the government. So you got the Bush family, and then you have Al Gore and Bill Clinton, right? So Al Gore was in office as the vice president at the time of the tech boom. So if you look, here's the GDP actually, and this had a major influence on what the debates were, what they actually talked about. They weren't talking about socialism and law and order and things like that. The major issues back in the 2000 election were actually more with foreign policy, and with the budget, how the budget was going to be run, given the surplus that the Clinton administration was turning over to the new president. And in fact, in the Clinton administration, 97, 98, 99, 2000, I think maybe just 98, 99, 2000 were all a surplus. That's a bulk of his second term. He produced a surplus on the budget, which we know that George Bush carried into 2001, right before the tech bubble burst. And so I think both presidents benefited greatly from the tech boom, right? The stock market bubble right there, with United States consolidating most of that information and most of that money. And then obviously 9/11 really crippled Bush's first term, and then it didn't really get much better in the second term. So no, I don't think that God cared who won either way that election. I think it really didn't matter if Al Gore or George Bush won, because essentially they were 2 sides of the same coin. They were both. And what does it mean for someone to be establishment, right? Because obviously George Bush and Al Gore were very different people. They had very different ideas on Medicare and healthcare and Social Security. Why were they part? What does that mean? They're both part of, controlled by these eagle heads. Well, you just have to watch the flow of money, and you see this past election, how much money. And when I say the establishment, we just mean like the DNC and the heads that control that, the people that are over that, the people that are over the RNC, and how much money they pump in to try to discredit and turn over seats. Right? How much money in Mitch McConnell's race in Kentucky was like a record amount of. I can't even remember the insane amount of money put into like an obvious red place to try to discredit and turn over that seat. They didn't even get close. Same thing happened with Senator Graham in South Carolina. And it's not just the RNC either. I mean, it's not just the DNC. If you look at some of the things that happened in Florida, there were these, dark money candidates that were running as third party that had the same last name as the Democratic candidate on the ballot. They didn't run any ads. They didn't run any, no campaign at all, no platform, no website, but yet they were able to siphon votes off of some of the Democratic candidates and make it is more on the state level, state senators and things like that, and make it so there are these razor thin wins for Republican candidates in the state of Florida. Okay, somebody's funding that. Somebody is behind that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong or whatever, but just because somebody has an R next to their name doesn't mean they're like on God's side, and just because somebody has a D next to their name doesn't mean they're on Satan's side. That's not how it works. And that's why President Trump's presidency was very different, because he was pulling the old Bloomberg approach. He's like, I'll just spend my own money. I'm a billionaire. I'll make more money if I lose. Bloomberg's probably already made enough money off of the past 4 months running coverage on Trump in the election to make up for all the money he pumped in trying to buy votes. So I don't think he really cares. He would have been kind of more of a populist president, just like Trump was, where he's not beholden to anyone behind the scenes. So just going back to that 2000 election, what made the 2000 election different was what Al Gore chose to do. Okay, so Al Gore had lost. Well, on election night he had won, and then there was a recount, I believe, and then he loses. Then he challenges it, and then they do a hand recount. But he didn't challenge every county, which was ultimately his downfall. And a lot of people will suggest the same thing. If he called for a statewide recount, which he was in his right to do, he very well may have won. But he chose only for a recount in some of these Republican strongholds. And I think their party lines are much more polarized in terms of race in 20 years ago than they are now. It's not really like that anymore. It is to an extent, but so he only had a handful of counties recounted, and it did close the gap, but it wasn't enough. Went to the Supreme Court. And the whole issue was over the way the ballot was created. And if you go look up a Florida ballot from 2000, it's just ridiculous. Now, here's the kicker. Where it's like, well, didn't justice prevail? Who was the governor of Florida back in 2000? If you don't know this answer and it shocks you, it shouldn't. It was George Bush's brother. George Bush's brother, Jeb, was the governor of Florida during the 2000 election. And so does it shock you at all that things may have been rigged in George Bush's favor? Does it shock you at all that after George Bush won, 9/11 happened about 10 months later? And does it shock you that after 9/11 happens that George Bush's family profits to the tune of tens of millions of dollars of defense contracts off the war? If that shocks you, it probably shouldn't. Now, I will not go as far to say that George Bush was intricately behind the 9/11 attacks. That is, you're coming out of the peanut gallery with allegations like that. I will say that attacks on the country are probably more common than rare, or at least threats of it. I don't know how often, somebody has a credible threat that they have to squelch out. We never hear about it. So I'm not going to say that George Bush never knew about it, or that he did know about it and chose to do nothing. I don't know. But I do know that their family profited greatly. What is different between that and now is that Trump is not, and remember the recount in Florida was only a couple hundred votes. Like the standard deviations that Al Gore was looking for was not very large. Like it was more likely than not that he could have had the state turned over if he had asked for a statewide recount. What Trump is trying to do has nothing to do with recounts. Like in terms of statistics, it is statistically impossible just for just human error or human malpractice in a local level to overturn 14,000 votes in Georgia. Now remember, that's only 7,000. If there were 7,000 that were put in for the wrong person and switched, that would be enough. 14,000 in Georgia. Right now it's a little over 12,000 in Arizona. I expect that to come within about 3,000, 4,000. And Pennsylvania is like 45,000. Wisconsin's 21,000. Michigan's like 150,000. It would be a statistical anomaly and an outlier if if Trump were able to flip even one of those states. But yet, out of the 4 that I mentioned, he would need to flip 3 of them in order to at least tie. He could at least tie if he flipped 3 out of those 4. Pennsylvania, I'm not sure if it's going to be a recount, but the reason why this is not the same is because it has nothing to. Al Gore's court case had nothing to do with voter fraud. It had to do with manipulation in the way that the ballot was created, and just the human response to the ballot, and how it was kind of difficult to understand, who to vote for. And then it was like a punch card, and then some of the punches weren't all the way out, called them hanging chads, and then some were just punched a little bit, called pregnant chads. And ultimately, he lost in the Supreme Court. Guess who was on that Supreme Court case, or who was an assistant to one of the Supreme Court justices at that time? Amy Coney Barrett. So she's got practice and experience with what's about to go down if it does make it to the Supreme Court. And I would argue that it's going to. This is going to happen. And you're going to need more of a case than we believe that 1,400 dead people voted in the state, or there's a 6,000 vote glitch in Michigan. You're going to need to come with something so spectacular as to convince enough people that the truth is prevailing, and not that you're just trying to bully and to buy an election. And I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I do know that Trump has been to court probably hundreds of times in his life. He's been, when you have as many kinds of businesses as you do, the amount of the amount of paperwork that would have to, trust me, as I own a small business, it's already difficult enough just operating. My brother and I, we share a business we have it registered in Michigan where he lives. I live in California. The amount of paperwork and the amount of headache it is to run a business just on a super small scale is insane. So when you got, he's got resorts and hotels and food companies and universities, and not all his businesses are good, quite frankly. And he's probably lost a lot more cases than he'd want to admit. But he knows how the system works. He knows how much time is necessary. And if it were, the way I'm thinking about it is he's waiting to the last possible second to strike, so that if he does win, there's not a chance to rebuttal before the Electoral College meets. There's not going to be a chance to do anything about it. It's going to be too late in the fat lady sings. It's my belief that something is going to happen. Something is going to radically change this country. I don't know if many are prepared for it. And a recent poll I was just listening, my wife was listening to Ben Shapiro's show. I heard it in the background that right now 3%, so 3 out of 100 Americans believe that Trump is going to win the election. Okay, remember that what we had, 48%, 47% of people voted for him. So out of Trump supporters, that means that about 95% of Trump supporters believe that the election's over. It's over. And probably an even higher percentage of Democrats think it's over. Trump's not going to win. 3 out of 100, which is going to make, if there is an overturn on this magnitude, it is going to make 2000 look like small potatoes. And you'll be shocked, in 2000 there were riots. There were straight up riots. It was crazy. Back in 2000, you think, 20 years ago, it was super civil. We didn't have any issues like we do now. Bro, go look at the videos. This is pretty intense. So 2020 is about to bring us something, if it does happen, and I'm in that 3%. And I'm not sure if, it's tough to see the forest through the trees sometimes, because on the surface, Joe Biden's saying all the right things, right? He's saying that unify the people and this, that, and the other. Let's say you weren't paying attention to the news the last 4 years, where they illegitimized his presidency for 4 years. They called him a racist and a xenophobic and this, that, and the other for 4 straight years. And now they're saying we're going to heal. Let's just say you didn't see any of that. And all you're seeing is, because most people don't really pay attention to politics at all. And they prefer not to talk about it even when it's put in their face. They see Joe Biden's speech and they're like, yeah, I'd prefer more of that. I prefer less name calling and more unity. And so on the surface, like, wait a second, he's saying everything my Savior would say. Everything Jesus would say. Like, hey, let's put aside our differences. It's not about reds and blues. This is about America. Right? That sounds like the right thing to say. Where Trump's like, Look at the red states, they do this, and the blue states, and it's very divisive, his presidency. But then you look at the surface, and this is why I think something is going to be done. I'm so happy to eat my words if I'm wrong. If Joe Biden becomes the president, nothing negative happens. The issues in 2000 had nothing to do with, were not moral issues in any way. There's nothing moral about the things that they opined on, Bush and Gore, that were wrong in the eyes of God. Right now, what we're dealing with on a level that we have never seen before is this promotion of, and the rhetoric that we use behind it really matters, right? When we say abortion, that's a soft way of putting it. If you say child sacrifice, that's very strong language. But in a very real way, the line between good and evil has been blurred so much that people on the blue team do not believe that locking a child that's a live child born on a failed abortion and putting it in the closet until it dies, they do not believe that is murder. A preemie, I don't know if they still call them that, in the NICU they call them preemies. They do not believe that is murder, okay? And that gets to, you think about that, and that's what the Mayans are doing. Sacrifice, human sacrifice. That's what in the Book of Mormon, a book of scripture, complementary to the Bible, that's what the Lamanites are doing. Child sacrifice, human sacrifice, right? Every culture that's fallen, that's become it's become ritualistic. The Romans, they had human sacrifice. They put humans out there to fight animals to the death. They had gladiators fight each other to the death. That's human sacrifice. You get in the territory when the sanctity of life is not preserved, that is very offensive to God. Now, that's just one issue, right? But that's a very big one. Probably one of the most important issues of the election that really isn't talked about as much is this idea of globalization and electrification versus kind of the old ways of doing things. And, the tides are changing faster than you probably want to admit. And this is where, in Trump's The Art of the Deal, doesn't he say when you're going to make a negotiation, you ask for something high and then you meet in the middle, right? So this is why I think that the Green New Deal is kind of something right out of his playbook, is it not? Like, ask for something absolutely ridiculous, just like absolute outlandish foolishness, and work on a solution. The facts that I looked up a few months ago, given the amount of oil reserves in the ground right now, known oil reserves, known gas reserves in the ground that we know of right now, and surely in the next handful of years, like exploration and techniques and things will advance, that this may grow. There are about, at the given levels, at the given use of oil that we have in America, there are about 50 years left of crude oil. 50 years of crude oil left in the ground at the current exhaustion rate, right? So if every country continued to use oil at the exact same rate that they are now, we have about 50 years left if nothing is done. And so that's why I think it is critical to look at, how are we going to change that, right? Having Hummers to get 12 miles a gallon is not going to cut it till the end of time. I think it is important to there be a transition, but it needs to be slower than what is being peddled right now, because we have 50 years of oil left before we've exhausted it. And if we can slow the rate of use, if we can turn towards solar and turn towards things that are actually sustainable renewable resources, we can probably slow the rate of exhaustion, and to the point where maybe it would make more sense 20 years from now to turn to an entirely electric economy. Yeah, I know you've seen the memes that you look at lithium mines and where they're mining for the element that's a major component of batteries, nickel mines, lithium mines, silver mines. They're run by these gigantic diesel tractors that run on fossil fuels. So there's not that doesn't mean it's a lost cause when you're using fossil fuels to create a sustainable resource. But how much, in terms of fossil fuel use, how much is being offset by the creation of electric vehicles and electric technology? How much is actually being offset? And that's the data that we need to look at, see if it's A, sustainable, B, you could balance the budget by doing it. Right now, with the current proposals, doesn't make sense. And that's why Mr. Trump is like, oh, well, we're going to keep the status quo as is until you come up with a better agenda. When the facts change, I'll change my mind. And I think that's where Biden shot himself in the foot and won Pennsylvania, but shouldn't have won Pennsylvania. Because the people there are relying on the energy. Once the oil is gone, sure, they're going to have to do something else. Just like when the typewriter was gone, that didn't mean that typewriter repair people just like died and were buried in the ground. They just had to adapt to a changing environment. And people that are involved in the fracking industry will be involved in the next mining and exploration that goes on, whether it be lithium or some other ore, right? And they'll move to somewhere else in the country. That's just the way that America works. That's the way the world works. But globalization is something that was a huge focal point in the election, and we see that we're not really in a position to globalize. We're already suffering as a country right now. Why would we want to outsource more of our production? In fact, the only thing that we have going for us in America, the only things we really export, what do you think it is? Weaponry, right? Now we actually can export oil, or refined oil, anyways, and refined petroleum products. But weaponry and machinery and war type items is really all we have. And the banking sector, that's really the only way we've been able to stay on top. And that's why war is so dang profitable for this country, is because it's one of the only exports that we have left that we have a monopoly on. And once that's gone, we have nothing. It's all made in China. Pick up 10 items in your house right now. 10 items. I don't care what they are. Besides clothing, not a lot of clothing's made in China. A lot of it's Central America, Vietnam, Korea, older if it's from the 80s and 90s. But pick up 10 items in your house. I would bet you that 8 or 9 out of 10 of them are made in China. And that's a scary future that we're looking at. Doesn't mean that we hate Chinese people. It just means we have to look at the long game, much like the Chinese do. They're looking at things from a 50-year perspective. They're not looking at 4 years trying to win an election. They only have one party, so they're looking 50 years out and say, what we're doing now, how's it going to affect our grandkids? Right? That's all they care about. They've got the oldest civilization in the world, the oldest dominant civilization, anyways. That goes back thousands of years. The Chinese have been doing things pretty much the same way, the same language in place. All right, these people are looking far into the future. They're very, very rigid and structured, and we shouldn't take them lightly, nor should we hate them. But it's important that we recognize that their government is not like ours. They don't care about the sanctity of human life. They don't have morals, because they don't rely on as Karl Marx would say, like the opiate of the people, or religion, to keep people in line. They do it by force. They just silence people. Where we, in America, for a very long time, religion has been, a belief in God, and that our moral character should fall in line with the will of God, has created literally character in people, where people do the right things for the right reasons, even when no one was watching, because they know somebody is watching, right? And that's the difference between the freedom we have here and the lack of freedom there. And if that changes, we're in for a really wild ride. Really wild ride. Is not going to be a good thing. So I hope that little history lesson helped you out and help you piece together what's going on in this country now. And if you liked it, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. Help me get my message out, and shoot me a comment. Let me know anything else you'd like to see, like to hear me talk about. So thanks so much. God bless.